We've got the Cahokia, which again, I don't know if that's saying it properly, but I'm doing the best I can considering. This is probably the largest indigenous cultural and population center in North America. It's located along the Mississippi River near present-day St. Louis, and at its height in about 1100 CE, this 5 square mile city was home to more than 10,000 residents. But tens of thousands of more people lived outside of this city and these surrounding farms. The city also contained what you can see here, earthen mounds. They had 120 of these. They might have been pyramids. They might have been earthen, like just built into the mounds. I'm not really sure. But each earthen mound dominated a neighborhood. And on each one of these lived the leader who exercised the authority over the surrounding area. So I'm sure they were built for some type of elevation of the elite. The largest mound covered 15 acres. And this city is also the hub of political and trading activities along the Mississippi River. Unfortunately, after 1300 CE, the civilization declines, possibly because they can't support the large growing population, so they have to disperse. And then finally, we have the Eastern Woodland tribes, which is our northeast and Canadian region here. These are people living east of the Mississippi, and they typically did not construct large and complex societies like those that we saw in the West. They usually lived in small autonomous clans or tribal units, and each group adapted to the specific environment in which it lived, which makes sense because if you've ever been in this region, there's a lot of different environments. These groups are not usually unified. You do have the Iroquois Confederacy, but most of the groups are not unified. Warfare among tribes is common, and it's usually because they're trying to increase their hunting and fishing areas. A lot of these tribes did share common traits, however. They usually had a leader or a group of tribal elders, which made decisions for the tribe, depending on where you were and which tribe you were in. Sometimes the leader was a man, sometimes it was a woman, sometimes the entire council was women. Usually the women selected the leader and counseled him, even if it was a man. Gender roles were typically not as fixed. They weren't like we would see in Europe, and they definitely weren't the patriarchal societies that you would see in Europe, Mesoamerica, and South America. A lot of the women had much greater roles in these tribes. Women typically cultivated beans, corn, squash, as well as harvesting nuts and berries, while the men hunted, fished, and provided the area's protection. But both took responsibility for raising children, and most native societies in the East, from what we know, were matriarchal, which means everything stayed in the woman's line, the family line, not the man's. In tribes like the Iroquois, the Lenape, the Muskogee, and the Cherokee, women had power and influence. They usually counseled the tribes. They passed on the traditions of the tribes. They were the ones in charge. These complementary gender roles are going to change dramatically once the Europeans arrive and introduce their own cultures, and usually, for the most part, force their culture in customs and traditions onto the native tribes that they run into. So that is the end of our native tribes pre-European arrival. Like I said, we will get back to Cortez and Montezuma later on, but we do need to look at life around the world pre-American Revolution, I guess. But even though APUSH doesn't really focus on this, for what we're doing, you haven't taken a world history class yet, so you do need to know what it's like for Europeans and what the trans-Saharan trade is and how European exploration goes, because for you guys, this is the first time you've experienced any of this. And if you just look at our quick timeline here, Christopher Columbus lands on Hispaniola in 1492. The Treaty of Tordesillas divides the Americas in 1494. Martin Luther publishes the 95 Theses in 1517. Hernan Cortez conquers Tenochtitlan in 1521. We'll talk about how he does that. John Calvin strengthens Protestantism by 1530. By 1534, Henry VIII breaks with the Catholic Church and establishes his own church, the Church of England. From 1584 to 1590, this is where we start to get our age of colonization. English try to colonize Roanoke. It doesn't work, but it's a stepping stone for what becomes America. In 1603, Samuel de Champlain founds New France up in Canada. In 1607, we get our first permanent English settlement in Jamestown, and by 1624, the Dutch found New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island. So that's where we'll be going in our next video.